Welcome to the Paid in Full podcast. I'm Devin Fadul, and in this show, I sit down with creatives of all stripes who have decided to follow their passion and carve out a unique path to success. My goal is to dive into their stories, learn about their philosophies, and share their hard-earned wisdom. In this episode, I talked to the legendary Kevin Dahlstrom. He's one of my favorite Twitter follows and a guy I really consider to be a role model. Not only is he a great dad and a successful entrepreneur, but what really hits home for me is the fact that he walked away from this prestigious corporate career and a few $1,000,000 to build a life that he truly loves, a life that he never wants to retire from. I find his story so inspiring, and I hope you will too. So let's get to it.
You know, it's funny. I started writing on Twitter during the lockdown phase of the pandemic because I was like sort of bored at home. I like to write. I'd been wanting to develop a practice of writing. And, it's funny. It's like initially it's shouting into the void, and then a few people discover you and it kind of builds and it compounds. And so it's been, the secret of writing and specifically writing on Twitter is that it's the author that gets all the benefit. You would think that like it's the readers that, learn things. And I guess that's true. But really like the practice of writing in itself is incredibly valuable.
Yeah. What's your schedule? Do you have a writing cadence?
I do. So I write every day, exceptions being like when I'm traveling or just unable to. But for me, I publish maybe 1 out of 10 things that I write. And so I'm writing every day. I may not publish every day, but what happens is it's a lot of trial and error. Like I'll have an idea or just something I want to express in writing, and I'll start working on it. And sometimes it just goes nowhere and I'll just delete it or leave it be. Sometimes it'll be an interesting thought, but I don't really have it like figured out how to articulate it yet. And so I'll work on it here and there over a few weeks. And sometimes, like the best songs, you talk to musicians, they always say that their very biggest hits were songs they wrote in 5 minutes. It was just a burst of inspiration. And so that happens occasionally too. But the cadence is I write every day. Most of it never gets published. And I publish only when I feel like I've got something that I'm proud of. I mean, that's really my only litmus test. Like, I think I'm maybe a little bit unique in that, like, to my own probably disservice, I've never written for engagement. I'm mindful of it, of course. You can't help but I literally, my litmus test is like, is this something I'm proud of? And as a result, what's happened, it's been interesting because I do pay attention to the metrics and whatnot, but a lot of my friends on Twitter who have built much bigger followings, they did so by using all the known kind of engagement tactics. And so they had these big bursts of growth. My growth of my following has been very steady and slow. Brick by brick is the way I refer to it. The benefit of that, though, like I have a smaller following than a lot of other people, but the benefit of it is like the people who do follow me are sort of like you. Like they follow me because they're legitimately interested. One time I was comparing engagement metrics with someone who has like 5 times more followers than me. So whatever, like 200,000 followers, I have like 40,000. And I actually had higher engagement numbers than they did with a fraction of the following. And it's because I always just like wrote what I believed in, what I cared about, and avoided all the like growth hacking stuff.
Yeah, man, I couldn't agree more. I've got a grand total of maybe 400 followers, but I'm doing the same thing. I don't care how many followers I have. I just want to put stuff out there that is somewhat interesting. It's organic, it's natural. I'm not trying to do the red game or the growth hacking, and God forbid if there's ever like a situation I get into like audience capture where I'm just kind of like giving the audience what they want. Like I just want to say what I want to say when I want to say it. Is it hurting me short term? Yes. But you just got to do stuff that's interesting, and the people will come. That's my thought.
And the thing about Twitter that a lot of people don't understand is that it's not like these other platforms, Instagram, TikTok, like you see these people who have huge followings, but they're like very casual followers. Twitter is different in the sense that a small but very select audience can be enough and can change your life. I tell people often, and I think people don't believe it until they see it, that 1,000 followers can change your life on Twitter. In fact, I have a friend here in Boulder who's a business owner, and I told him that when he started tweeting, and now I looked the other day, he has a little over 1,000 followers, and he said, "You were right, Kevin. Like it really has changed the game for me." So just like get on there, comment. People notice when you comment. Like I knew your name from way back because you were commenting on my posts occasionally, and then like start writing and shouting into the void. it's one of those things that happens like slowly, then all at once. It seems like nobody's reading or paying attention, but eventually it just builds and builds and builds. And I think 1,000 followers is enough to like really have a great community.
Yep. Very true. I'm not speaking from experience, but I hope to get there. I don't want 100,000 followers. I don't want huge numbers. I want dense numbers, right? I guess now we're talking about it. Any mistakes that you made? Did you go down the growth hacking route and it just didn't work and it affected you negatively, or was it, I don't know, anything big or small?
So a couple of things. Number one, I have a friend who has over 1 million followers on Twitter. And he posted something the other day. He said the sweet spot is under 50,000, right? And so I think there is a sweet spot, because I think if your account gets too large, you start to lose the magic. You become sort of a mass follower account. And it's a little bit different game. I think the power of Twitter is in these small niche communities: real estate Twitter, SMB Twitter, startup Twitter, some of these others, finance Twitter, like some of these spaces I tangentially play in. But I will tell you, since you asked about mistake, I wrote about this the other day. So I hired this friend early on to help me with growth hacking. I was like, okay, I want to grow my account. I want followers. And he basically looked at my account and he said, you're doing everything wrong. You need to post more frequently. You need to have snazzier headlines. You need to do this. You need to do that. And I was like, well, that doesn't sound like fun at all. And so I ignored every single one of his recommendations. So I think I did start heading down that path to the dark side. But I pretty quickly realized, like, at the end of the day, at this stage in my life, I'm not going to do anything if I don't enjoy it and it's not fun or fulfilling, or I don't learn anything. And like that growth hacking stuff just isn't that interesting to me. So I kind of went back to the basics. And again, I just truly 80% of the motivation for me writing is purely selfish, like just to have writing as a practice. The other 20% is, I enjoy having that audience. But yeah, it's mostly just about having the practice of writing and pleasing myself.
Mm-hmm. Is there any component to it as well where you're like, do you think of it as like a journal, like Marcus Aurelius style? Over half of my posts are just like reminders to myself. It's almost like my journal. And I'm wondering if you think of it that way as well.
I mean, in some ways, it is. I don't tend to write about super personal stuff, although I always bring personal examples into it. For me, it's mostly about, I believe nothing sharpens thinking like writing, because you think you'll have a thought, and when you write it down and iterate on it, you'd be shocked at how much that thought gets shaped and even changed. And sometimes you realize it's not even like I said, I throw away a lot of my writing because it's just like, oh, that was a dumb idea. Like I thought it was a good idea, but when you really dig into it, and I think there also, one thing that I'd say is like different about Twitter than just journaling is that I think there is something special to the idea of publishing or shipping something. It demands a certain level of fit and finish and focus and iteration to make it worthy of publishing that you wouldn't get in a journal. Journals tend to be like sort of stream of consciousness thought. I think there's a lot to be said and a lot to be learned from, like, can I articulate this idea very clearly and in a structured way? That's an art in itself that I'm not sure journaling teaches you.
That's such a great point. And you said you don't get too personal, but you're definitely more personal than your average large Twitter person. I think so. On that note, let's take a step back. The only research that I've done is just from following you on Twitter. So I know that you were a CMO at least one shop.
Yeah.
And you've kind of built your career, which is probably 30 years long at this point, right? You're 52, right? Mm-hmm. Give me a quick elevator pitch of like what you've been doing since you graduated.
Well, I think before I do that, I just want to give you, I want to make a distinction between being personal and being vulnerable. Like when I'm trying to make a point, I'll use personal examples, and I like to think that I'm pretty vulnerable, and like, especially like when it comes to my weakness or the areas I've struggled. In my Twitter bio, it literally says, I learned everything the hard way, so you don't have to. And I laugh about it, but it kind of is true. Like I think the greatest lessons come from mistakes and failures. And so that tends to be the things I'm most interested in writing about. So I do tend to be pretty vulnerable about that, which is relatively new thing for me. Like I think you have to reach a certain stage in life to be comfortable being that vulnerable. But to answer your question, I grew up in Texas, got my education in engineering, and never worked a day as an engineer, but came out of school and started in management consulting. But I came out of school right around the time, like the late 90s, when the internet was taking off. And it was pretty clear, like, this is very cool. It feels like what AI feels like today. Like it's clear that it's going to change everything. And we see some of the ways are obvious and some of them are not obvious.
Hey guys, just a quick break to let you know this podcast is sponsored by my company, Adda Financial. You hate personal finance, and rightfully so. Let Adda handle the boring stuff, like investments, student loans, and insurance, so you don't have to. To learn more, check out the link in the show notes or go to addafinancial.com. Now back to the show.
So got involved with the internet, and I sort of spent most of my career at the intersection of the internet and financial services. I always liked money. It's a product that everyone likes and understands. It's not perishable. It involves math. And so I was always a math geek. And so what I think is kind of unique about my career is that, as you mentioned, I've definitely had roles in big companies. Like, I think I'm the only CMO that's done a rebrand of 3 public companies. In fact, I'm certain that I am. So I've worked in big company America, but I've also founded, I think, 5 or 6 companies, depending on how you count them. And so I've lived most of my career kind of bouncing back and forth with like one foot in the world of entrepreneurism and one foot in corporate America. I think I'm done with corporate America for good, mainly because, control over my life and my calendar is super important to me. But I think that provided a unique perspective. Like for those 30 years of my career, I think I've run harder than just about anybody for longer than just about anybody. And as a result, it's just like compounding. I've had these like incredible wealth of experiences just from being there and trying really hard. And so that tends to be like the inspiration for my writing, just these crazy situations I've been in and some of the lessons I've learned.
And that's the name of your podcast too, Compounding. So
yeah. I mean, that's my whole shtick is like in every area of life. People think about compounding when it comes to money, obviously, but compounding applies to every single area of life, whether it's health, relationships, non-monetary pursuits, like in my case, rock climbing, baby steps over a long period of time. It's amazing how you look back 10 years and it's like, wow, I can't believe how far I've come just from consistency and baby steps.
Yeah, man, it's something I've internalized only recently, I think. I always knew it, but these days rather than kind of like shy away from that day-to-day work, I can't wait to do that. The 1% better every day mentality. I live by that now. At least I try to.
Well, I think it's what you're talking about is being deliberate, right? It's like I sort of understood those concepts when I was younger, but it's all about, it's one thing to understand it. It's another thing to be deliberate about it and take action every day. And I tend to be a very unstructured person. I'm a creative thinker. And so like structure and discipline aren't my natural nature, but I think the point you're making is like, you've learned that over time. And I have too. I think it's a maturing process where now, like if you would have asked me when I was 35, are you a disciplined person? I'd said, yeah, probably just like average, like maybe even below average. If you ask me now, I'd say, yes, I'm an extremely disciplined person. It doesn't mean that like I'm super structured in how I go about my day, but I do make sure there's a local rock climbing guide here in Boulder who's pretty well known in climbing circles. And he has a saying like, it's all money in the bank. It's like, are you making those deposits every day? Like might be just a couple pennies that you're depositing, but are you making those deposits every day? Because the power of compounding is those little deposits, you make them every day. And 3 years later, the progress you've made. And it's so easy just to not make those deposits. Like it's always easier to do nothing. But over time, the difference between someone who's taking little baby steps and someone who's not, it's exponential, right? And I'm not saying this to be arrogant, but that's how I feel about like myself versus a lot of my peers. I mentioned like running hard for 30 years. I almost in some ways can't relate to a lot of the people I started my career with because I've done just through sheer effort, like nothing special about me, just sheer effort. I've done so much more.
Mm-hmm. Do you read Morgan Housel at all? Financial writer?
I'm familiar with it. I don't read regularly.
He's fantastic, but he's got this kind of axiom of what is it? Something like common returns for an uncommon period of time leads to incredible returns or something like
That's right.
that. So it's basically just stay the course and don't go into financial ruin and you'll be okay.
But also stay the course and take baby steps, but also like have an idea where you're headed. So a lot of young guys, probably every month I'll have 20 guys, and it's almost always men, reach out to me through Twitter and say, hey, here's my situation. What's your advice? And I have this policy that's becoming difficult to maintain, but I answer all DMs But what's funny is what I've learned over time is the situation doesn't matter at all, whatever their situation is. My advice is almost always the same. Is like step one is try to understand what your destination is. And it sounds simple and obvious, but very few people actually take the time to, and I'm talking literally sit down and bullet point out, like, what does your end state life look like? Like, who are you around? What kind of work are you doing? Where do you live? What are you doing with your time? And I've done this. I published it on Twitter. And once you've done that, then the path in front of you suddenly illuminates. Like whatever your situation, like I'm facing this situation in my career. I'm struggling with this relationship. When you define that endpoint, it suddenly becomes clear exactly what you need to do in your current circumstances. And I've never had that method fail. So that's like my fail-safe advice that really kind of turns the question back on the asker, which is like, I don't even need to understand your situation. Until you've done this, you probably aren't ready to even ask the right questions.
Mm. So what's your North Star, for lack of a better term? Are you living it right now?
Yeah. So I published mine. I could actually pull it up, but I published mine and it was like 20 bullet points. Almost like think of it as like, what does a day look like? Like, how are you spending your time? Who are you around? And if there's 20 items on my list, I've probably checked off, 16 of them or something.
When did you make this list?
I published it this year, but
Okay.
I've had some form of it for a few years.
Okay.
I don't know if you know my story, but like back in 2018, when I moved to Boulder, Colorado, I did a pretty major reboot of my life. And that was when I sort of got clarity around this stuff. But so just so your listeners know, like the types of things that would be on this list, like Kevin's best life is what it's titled. Challenging, intellectually stimulating work done on my terms, mornings free to read, write, and think, at least one active, creative, or personal project, controlled 90% of my schedule, lots of sunshine and time outside, ability to live and work anywhere I choose, a small, beautifully designed home with a view, things like that. And that was 5 out of like 20, but you can see how specific it is.
Mm-hmm.
It's amazing how like, it sounds kind of hokey, but if you go through that process and literally write those things down, all of a sudden it becomes like crystal clear. Like, oh, of course I shouldn't take this job in Omaha because it doesn't align at all with where I want to be. Now, of course, there's always things you do as a means to an end, but being mindful of that end goal is where it all starts.
That's essentially my practice in a nutshell. I'm not going to go into it, but this is an exercise that I do for myself that I'm not going to say force, but highly, highly encourage all my clients to do. And I call it a money vision. And another thing that we talk about is kind of working to live, not vice versa. And what that means is like this conception of retirement, lowercase r retirement, which is what you did 5 years ago or so, right?
Yeah.
Can you tell me about like the thought process? Like what happened? Was there a burnout? Was it a big moment? Was it years of kind of ruminating? Like what happened there? What made you
all the above?
Kind of stop?
There was a specific moment where I did have an epiphany where I was in this like CMO job at a public company, big salary, blah, blah, blah. I was sitting in a board meeting with about 10 guys, all of whom were in financial terms, like way more successful than me. But I looked around the table and they were all unhealthy. Some of them had told me they were super unhappy and there wasn't a single one of them I wanted to emulate. And I was like, I am completely on the wrong track here. So I did something that a lot of people would say is crazy, which is like walked away from like the golden handcuffs, it's kind of a made man and, did this reboot, never looked back. Of course, it was the right thing because I think I'm actually writing a thread on this as we speak, and it's going to come out this week. But in my view, there's 2 dimensions to success. You can give it like a 2x2 matrix, if you like that sort of thing. One is accomplishment, and accomplishment is how most people define or talk about success, right? Accomplishment is how much money you've made, how much status you have, how much expertise you have built up. And those are all great things, but it's only one dimension of success. The other dimension, which I would argue is more important for happiness, is control. So it's accomplishment and control. And there's a lot of people out there who are very accomplished, but they have very little control. The prime example being my friend who's the CEO of a multi-billion-dollar public company. He's incredibly accomplished and respected, but even still, he has very little control over his life. And so nirvana or true success to me is when you've accomplished a lot, but you've also over time gained control. And just like accomplishment, control doesn't happen overnight, So you have to be very mindful about both of those things. And back to this idea of like building this bulleted list of your ideal life, you'll notice that a lot of the things I mentioned are about control. In fact, I literally said control 90% of my schedule. That's like super important to me, to happiness, because I do my best work in open space, and probably a lot of knowledge workers, creative thinkers do. And so like a calendar packed with meetings is like soul crushing to me. It's just not a happy spot. And so that's a control aspect, because there's a lot of people who have, again, accomplished a lot, but they've got a calendar full of meetings. And that's, for me, that's not success.
Why 90%? Why not 100%?
I'm really glad you asked that. I was wondering if you were going to pick up on that, because I think it's actually not a good thing if you have too much control. I like how you said retirement with a small r, because classic retirement with a big R, I think, is a recipe for misery. I think you build a life that you want to sustain forever, and that life by necessity includes hard, challenging work. In fact, I think it also needs to include some degree of fear and uncertainty. If you're not doing things that are scary and uncertain, you're going to have trouble being truly happy. And so same thing with control. You have to have something that anchors you. And so like, I like the idea that I have some accountability to other people. And that's that 10% of the calendar. Like there's still things on my calendar that I have to do. Now it's by choice. I choose to commit to. In fact, this very podcast is a great example. Like today's Memorial Day, right? You and I could probably be doing other things right now. I chose to commit to this podcast because I like to be on the hook for a few things. And so this podcast would actually be in that 10% of things. Like if I was just leading a life of leisure, I wouldn't do podcasts, but I choose to because it's a form of growth for me.
Oh, I gotta like process that. First of all, everything you're saying so far, and this is why I follow you on Twitter. Everything is resonating. If not, I already wholeheartedly believe in it. Right. So this is great stuff. And
well, I like to put it, Devin, is like these things, like a lot of what I say is like, I sometimes refer to myself as a master of the obvious, because like these are things we all know. I think what I maybe do is like just articulate them in a way that resonates. That's kind of like my whole shtick on Twitter is like, these things deep inside. Like, if you're a knowledge worker, like having a calendar packed with 10 meetings a day is not the best way to be productive. Yet we sort of go along with that stupid game because, that's the way the world has always been, that factory work model. And so a lot of these things we know, but someone has to stand up and say, wait, this doesn't make any sense.
Yep. I can count myself among those dissenters, but.
Absolutely.
Okay. So you're running the company, you're doing a ton of rock climbing, you're a father, you're on Twitter, you got a lot going on.
Yeah.
What's your average day look like? What's your average week look like?
Yeah. So I'll use today as an example because I think it's a good one. I'm an early riser. So I get up, I do my yoga and stretching because I'm getting older and I'm always battling some sort of injury. Right now it's my back. It's giving me problems. And then my most precious time of the day before the rest of my family gets out of bed is after I finish my stretching, I'll grab a coffee and get on Twitter. And usually I'll read for 5 or 10 minutes, respond to a few things, and then I'll write. And maybe it's something I've already started. Maybe it's something new. That writing can last anywhere between 20 minutes and 2 hours. Then I'll usually transition into more of like a work mode, like catching up on email, working on documents, whatever, have a couple of meetings. And then, I am a guy who my energy is best in the morning, and then it slowly wanes through the day. My family makes fun of me because I'll say like around 5 or 6 in the evening, I always say I hit a wall because I tend to expend a lot of energy. And so my evenings are pretty chill, like spending time with family, just hanging out. So it's usually like, reading or watching YouTube videos or whatever, kind of wind up the day. And that's it. Lather, rinse, repeat. I mean, once you have a lifestyle that you actually like, you don't want it to change. In fact, I joke that I sometimes get grumpy when I go on vacation because I already live in, what I consider the best place in America. And I already have the life that I want every day. So like, I don't like it when that gets disrupted.
If you weren't a rock climber, where would you live?
Look, I geeked out on this topic when I lived in Texas for many years. I visited a bunch of places, looked at all the data. And when you look at all the combinations of like the right size town, great weather, access to an international airport, a good culture, a major university, like all the things that were kind of important to me, access to the outdoors, whether you climb or not, that there's a reason Boulder's always at the top of these best places to live. The only reason it wouldn't be number one on every list is because it costs a lot to live here. Homes are ridiculously expensive. And when you're a rock climber, then it just becomes over the top obvious. Like it's literally, if you're a climber, the best place in the world to live. So, if I didn't climb, I might still live in Boulder because I'd probably be doing other outdoor stuff. I do like the coastal areas too. I kind of grew up in that environment. But if I had to choose, there's always like, are you a mountain person or a beach person? I'm definitely more of a mountain guy.
Yep. So you're in the right place. Okay. So you're the boss. At the very least, you're an entrepreneur. So you're able to kind of carve out this schedule. Does having a normal 9 to 5 kind of preclude you or anybody else from living that lifestyle, or is there a way?
No, there is a way. Like I did it for many years. Where it becomes really difficult is if you have to be in an office every single day. That's a lifestyle killer when you have to like commute to an office and sit in an office, because that's a huge chunk of your time. That literally like physically precludes you from doing, like a simple example is like when you're working from home, especially in the summer when your kids are at home, you can take a break and go have a 5-minute conversation, go for a walk, whatever. You can task switch very quickly. And it's just being in an office, especially if it's like a long commute, sort of precludes that completely. And so I think if you're in an office full time, it's really hard to have a great lifestyle. If you're hybrid, it's a little easier. Now, to be really clear, this is an end state that you aspire to. You may very well have to put in pay your dues when you're young. Like I did it. Everybody has to do it. Like when I was in my 20s, I wasn't doing podcasts about lifestyle. Like I was grinding it out, like everybody else. But you have to do that with the end in mind. And that's where I probably could have done a lot better. That's why I preach about this stuff. Is like, if I had been more deliberate about what the end goal was, I probably would have reached something similar to what I have today, like 10 years sooner, like literally 10 years sooner, maybe 15 years sooner. So that's why it's important to be deliberate. Doesn't mean that you don't spend 5 or 10 years grinding it out in the trenches, but it means like do it with the end in mind.
Yeah, that's kind of where I'm at right now. I'm certainly at the beginning of that stage, trying to grind it out, but also trying to balance living a smart lifestyle and spending time with my family. But look, it's Memorial Day, like you said. This is my third meeting of the day. I don't know, call it grinding, but it's my version of grinding, I guess.
Well, it's only a grind if you don't like what you're doing. And of course, like back to that 90-10 rule, there's always some percentage of work that you don't like doing and you just have to do it. It's like cleaning your house or whatever. But, I think 80-20 or 90-10 is like as good as it gets. The problem I had with corporate America when you have to, again, commute, be in an office every day, is like 70% of your time was like stuff that wasn't fulfilling. And even when I was in corporate America, I had it about as good as it gets. And I'd probably say like 40% was like, BS stuff and 60% was stuff I enjoyed, which is pretty good, but I wanted even more. And I think, again, the unlock is really having flexibility in where and when you work. I mean, I choose to work really hard, but the freedom to do that when you want to and where you want to is like the single biggest life hack. And that's why I think remote work is an unstoppable trend, because more and more people are realizing that it's a better lifestyle, but it's also far more productive. Companies haven't figured out how to manage that effectively yet. So that's kind of the stage we're in, but it's inevitable that we'll get there.
Mm-hmm. Well, you are running a company. So how have you addressed that dichotomy or whatever you want to call it?
Swell, my company, is remote first. So, that's the biggest unlock. And we're remote first, not because it's like we're trying to provide great lifestyle. It's because we truly believe like the people we want to hire, we can't be limited to the Boulder area. That's absurd. If you think about it, like even people who are willing to reload, which is an increasingly small percentage. So, our team of, 14 people, we're in Texas, India, South Carolina, Kansas, Colorado, of course, and I'm probably missing a couple. We hire the best people and we flip the model. So instead of being on site all the time and then occasionally doing fun offsites, we're offsite all the time. And we get together twice a year for what we call on-sites, where we are very deliberate about our team building. Like when we go do our 2-day on-sites, we explicitly say like, we're not here to do work. We are not at this place to do work. We're here to explore big ideas, to get to know each other, to have fun. And when you're deliberate about it, a little bit goes a long way because as we all know, the reality is when you're in an office 40 hours a week or whatever, the majority of the time you're just sitting at your desk anyway. Like you're not having the proverbial water cooler conversations. I think that the value of that is vastly exaggerated. And by the way, keep in mind, our remote tools and processes are in the primitive stages. Like they're only going to get 10x better over the next few years. So yeah, it's like I have a friend of mine who's a CEO, and he always says like, make decisions that put you on the right side of history. Right. And so like looking back 20 years, I don't think we're going to be working the same old butts and seats office model.
Yeah, couldn't agree more. Even pre-COVID, I had started a new job and I was trying to get out to all of the different locations in our kind of partnering teams, just have a drink, have lunch, just shake hands with somebody.
Totally.
Because I've been in positions where we working with somebody over the phone for years and I had never met them. And just it takes one meeting, it takes 1 5-minute face-to-face interaction and your work relationship will 10x. I don't know. I'm a big believer in that. Again, just
Absolutely.
going on with
100%. Ironically, I'm a face-to-face guy. I just happen to believe remote work is a superior model, but same thing, like at Swell, the policy is if you need to get on a plane and go sit with somebody, do it. There's unlimited budget for that. Tomorrow, I'm going to Phoenix to meet with some folks on a big real estate project there because I think it's really important to be there face-to-face. So huge believer in that. In fact, later in June, the CEO of a pretty big company is flying out to visit me. I'm picking him up at the airport in Boulder, and we're going to go for a hike, not because we can't do a Zoom, but because we know that we're at the stage where we need to be face-to-face. Mm-hmm. And that seems pretty obvious to me. Like when it's appropriate and when it's necessary to get face-to-face, just do it. Like make the effort.
Couldn't agree more. And the only confusing thing is that large companies haven't caught up to it yet. I have no idea what's going on, but, and I'm with you, I'm a face-to-face guy. I don't get it. There has to be some good reason for it.
That's right. I think there's some good reason, like to be clear, there are some good reasons to be in an office, like depending on the job type. Like I'm not a sales guy, but my friends who are in sales just say like, there's huge value to having everybody together in that boiler room, right? And working it out. You're learning from each other, like hearing each other talk on the phone. I think there are certain roles and job types where it makes a ton of sense. And there's some where it doesn't. Why do we have a one size fits all model? It's crazy. Like, so to me, it's like, do what makes sense for the team and the role.
It sounds like the theme of this is kind of just reassessing maybe. And that's what we're talking about there with lowercase retirement. This is what I talk to with my clients and prospective clients all the time is like, just take a step back and reassess because you enter your work life or you enter your 30s or you enter parenthood with these like scripts and these preconceived notions and this conventional wisdom of one way to do it, right? Whether it's your family or your religion or your country or whatever, you have to do it this one way. And part of my job, and it's easy for me because I've been like this iconoclast since I was a teenager, but like, just take a step back. We don't have to do it that way, right? Yeah. You can't afford it. You don't have to buy your fiance a $20,000 diamond ring. It's okay. Dumb little things like that, all the way up to the idea that you work for 30 years and then you just stop and then you golf and then you die. Like you don't have to do it that way.
We couldn't be more aligned. And I suspect you may be an Enneagram 8, which is a challenger. The Enneagram is a personality typing system. And it comes naturally to challengers to challenge the status quo. That's how we're wired. My wife is a 1, which is basically like a rule following type. And she doesn't challenge the rules naturally. But what you're really talking about is challenging societal norms. And guess what? It turns out that a lot of societal norms are just dead wrong. Chasing after what you see on Instagram highlight reels. We all fall into that trap occasionally, but it's absolutely not a path to happiness. And even this idea that I talked about earlier, like the 2 dimensions of success being accomplishment and control, we almost exclusively focus on accomplishment. And we don't think a lot, especially when we're younger, about slowly gaining control over our lives. And, some people like you and I, we naturally kind of think that way. But for some people, it's a revelation.
Yeah, I would say for most people, the vast majority of people.
Well, yeah, I mean, if you look at statistically how most people are living their lives, it is. They're just sort of following, what'd you call it, like the script, following the script. And I think we're at a point more than ever where the script is sort of broken, and it's only going to get more that way. Like the old factory work model sort of worked in a pre-internet era, Because when you didn't have these community, like we're talking on Zoom right now, and then it started making less and less sense with the internet. And now it makes very little sense, but we tend to cling to these things. Old habits die hard.
Inertia is very powerful.
Yeah.
Well, man, look, I know you got to run. Let me ask maybe one more question. This is purely for selfish reasons. How do you get a teenage daughter to do the things? How do I say this? How do you get a teenage daughter to hang out with you, to enjoy some of the things that you enjoy? In your case, it's rock climbing. Any tips or tricks?
Well, my standard statement on parenting is anyone who claims to have it figured out is a charlatan. Like none of us have it figured out. So I can give you like what I've observed, but I'll go back to your retirement analogy. I think people think about like spending time with your kids or hanging out, as you said. They think of hanging out with a capital H, and really they should be thinking about it with a small h, lowercase, because I talk a lot about in-between moments. So some of my most meaningful interactions with my kids happen in 5-minute increments when like we just happen to both be in the kitchen and we talk about life for 5 minutes. Right. And I think people like build up these like grandiose, we need to go do this or do that together and have this amazing experience. And what was it? John Lennon, I think, that said like, life is what happens while you're busy making other plans. Like life is in the minutia. It's in the mundane. So I would say that's it. And this ties back to this idea that you need to be there, like must be present to win is a big thing. Like that's why like working from home is so powerful. And I know not everyone has that privilege, but if you do have that privilege, that ability, you should absolutely take advantage of it if you have kids, because there's a concept that came from the book Die with Zero, which is a great book, called time buckets. And like there are some things that you can't do later in life. And 93% of the time you're going to spend with your kids happens before age 18. That's a sobering statistic. So if you have this idea that you're going to work really hard and provide for them, and then later in life, you're going to build a relationship with your kids, that's not going to happen, buddy. Sorry. You missed the opportunity. So that time buckets concept is really powerful, because part of like when you make that life list that I talked about, that ideal life, you have to then, the next step that I didn't talk about is you have to bucket them out, because there's some of those things on that list that can't wait. Even for me, like being a pretty serious rock climber, like I'm probably not going to be doing my best climbing in my 70s. So there's a season of life right now, and I'm probably nearer to the end than the beginning at 52, where if I'm going to climb, I got to get her done. What does that mean for day-to-day life? It means that I really prioritize my climbing even over business opportunities. That's why having a clear idea of what you want, bucketing it into time, then you can take action on it. You can make decisions based on it.
Does that mean that the business stuff will be prioritized more in your 60s and 70s maybe? Or
maybe. I think it's an evolving thing. Depends on what's important to me at the time. But like I think the business stuff, I have to have that as part of my life. The question is it a full-time operating role? Like right now I am in a full-time operating role. I'm the CEO of a company. Or is it some other role where you still have skin in the game, but you're not the guy running the day-to-day? And I think the latter is probably more what it looks like for me, even starting in the next couple of years.
Well, listen, man, this is fantastic. I could go for several more hours. I got a bunch more stuff I wanted to talk about, but maybe we'll save that for another time. But before we kind of hang up here, where can listeners find you? I know Twitter. Where else?
Yeah, I mean, that's kind of my hub. Is I'm at Camp4, CAMP, the number 4 on Twitter. And that's where I put most of my stuff. There's links to everything else I do in my bio. So yeah, this has been a fun discussion. You asked really good questions. This is the stuff you could probably tell I'm passionate about this stuff. And I think, my future probably looks like work that aligns with this stuff. Like it's less about traditional business things and more about work that sort of aligns with this lifestyle stuff, where I think I have something to offer. So thanks for giving me a platform for talking about some of my ideas.
Thanks for coming on, man. This is great. And I think that there's a book in your future. Maybe not a traditional book, maybe kind of this multimedia experience where you've got the book and then it interlinks with YouTube videos somehow, and then audio only, and then Twitter. I don't know. There's something there, because you've got.
Yeah, you actually read my mind, and I don't even call it a book because it's going to take the form of something that looks kind of different from a book. But stay tuned and get on my newsletter using the link in my bio, because I'm running a pilot test for something in September that is the beginning of a much bigger idea that is along the lines of what you're talking about. So it's already it's been in the works for a while, and it's well on its way. So stay tuned.
Okay. All right. I'm excited. All right, man. I'll let you get back. Happy Memorial Day. Enjoy time with the family.
Yeah.
Enjoy Colorado. And we'll talk soon, man.
Absolutely.
Take it easy.